Good morning, folks. And here's one of my favorite game journalists from Kotaku, who's no longer at Kotaku, thankfully, Jason Schreier. And he's talking about how Naughty Dog and the culture of work there has been rather painful to game developers. Now, if you're in media or entertainment, whether you're in Hollywood or video games, there's what's called crunch culture, or having no life outside of your work. So in Hollywood, it's like, 14, 16-hour days. In video games, it's about that as well, 12-hour days on average. And it's no different at Naughty Dog. So with the release of all the leaks that came out recently, there's a whole bunch of people, I'd say, was it 70% as reported by Schreier, that have left the company on previous titles, not just The Last of Us 2. So the whole premise is that the game is really good, but at a huge cost to the people they're working. So it does a lot of painful life experiences for those who really want to get into video games or who have been doing it and realize, hey, you know what? This isn't worth it. It's not worth it to my family, to your lifestyle, to your paycheck, to your sleep order, to everything in having a healthy lifestyle. As much as you love making games, as much as you've playing games and being part of the industry, it's not the best industry to get into. I've went to school for that. And I looked at all my options. I said, oh, this is what's going to happen to me if this ever does come to pass. So they have a culture of perfectionism where games have to be great no matter the human cost. And generally, that's the opinion of workers. It's like, I'm paying you a fee or a salary. Your problems are your own. Get the job done. It's the general opinion of workers, not the best opinion, for sure. That's why we have HR teams. That's why we have vacation and all these other laws and civic laws to protect workers' rights, to keep us healthy and sane and well-fed, essentially. So they do try to take care of you, providing food, encouragement to go take breaks, said one former developer. But for the most part, the implication is get the job done at all costs, which is very similar to, let's say, other software development jobs where you're forced to work after hours. Laws like getting paid time and a half after, I think it's 10 hours or 12 hours, depending on what state, what country you're in. So yeah, they will pay you cab fare. They'll pay you for your meals. They'll pay you for other perks. Maybe there's already perks at the place you work. So they want to make you as comfortable as possible so you could work there as long as possible while sort of going, oh yeah, you don't have a life outside of your job. For my case, I was working with web developers, even nowadays, which is a lax schedule for working because of the lockdown and quarantine, that, yeah, we have to pay you under the table if you still want to do work. So everyone's not fired, we're just suspended. And we're waiting for an actual project to come in with actual deadlines, with actual project managers and charts saying our schedule is going to be like. So these things are real. Whether it's intense, whether there's a deadline or not, or a serious deadline or a quick deadline. So with video gaming, especially with the AAA gaming and Naughty Dog, the pressure to perform is intense. And if you don't perform, you're slowing everyone else down. So if a developer wants to work late one night and he has to wait for assets from a modeler, that's slowing down production. So there's a lot of give and take between the departments of developers and designers and modelers and animators and musicians and what have you. This can't be something that's continuing over and over for each game because it's unsustainable, said one developer on The Last of Us 2. At a certain point, you realize, I can't keep doing this. I'm getting older. I can't stay and work all night. And this is pretty much the same stuff you saw with BioWare. Even as far back as the first game, Mass Effect, or the first big game, Mass Effect, a lot of the people left that production. And this is during the getting bought out by Microsoft, then getting bought out by EA. So obviously there's lots of executives changing power structures and hierarchies in the company. But the producers, the Casey Hudsons, they either leave or they get different marching orders from whomever. Doesn't mean that it totally ruins the production, as you can see from their sales figures. And obviously people love these games. and love these media they play. But there's obviously a change in corporate culture, and the need to perform keeps getting higher and higher. So crunch culture at Naughty Dog isn't a secret, as it's not a secret in any industry, really. The studio's open about this mentality in interviews and new hires, and its managers deliberately seek out perfectionists in art, design, engineering, and all the other disciplines that make games happen. The problem is time. Apparently, Uncharted 4 took 2 years to make, which is amazing, but you can imagine how stressed and how busy that entire production was. At Naughty Dog, nobody asked the developers to crunch. Nobody has to ask. They'll be there anyway. See, this is not good. This is unhealthy for any production. Now, you might say, well, that's how art gets made. It's a labor of love. Yeah, it's a labor of love if you're talking about an individual artist doing their own thing and being passionate and not worrying about the confines of someone else or a project manager or a deadline. They're doing it because they have an urge to write or paint or draw or whatever they do. When you're talking about a multimedia experience or new media experience that's interactive like video games, you're relying on art and design, project managers, developers, modelers, artists, all mocap guys, sound design, sound engineering, all sorts of people that work together in tandem to provide you an experience, whether you're clicking a button or firing a gun or running across a level. There's so much that goes into this stuff. So Jason Schreier interviewed these guys back in 2016 in California, and he talked to Neil Druckmann and Bruce Stanley after taking over Uncharted 4, much to their chagrin. They found themselves rewriting the script, making rapid decisions just to feed the beast, to keep all those people working, and they had less than 2 years to finish the game. So this is a huge product. They're making great changes to the script, making sure people are still working and still employed so they can use them to finish off the rest of the game, because that's how these projects end up working. Whereas you're working on, like, say, chapter 1, or a developer's working on a certain component, but they have to wait on design or models or levels from the design team so they have working on other components. So they're doing things in so many piecemeal components that you have this giant task list, and your piece of software is in parts. And it's kind of like an assembly or making a car without the assembly factory. You don't have that clear conveyor belt of, like, it goes from A to B to C. It's like now you're working on A, now you're working on J, now you're working on the ending of the game, now you're working on lighting, now you're asking and waiting for parts to come in. So there's all this jumping around. It's pretty hectic, and I would not like to be on that sort of product just because of all the moving parts, all the project managers of project managers and designers of designers. So it's just this big, hefty, huge project. I would never want to do Uncharted 4 again, Straley said, because now we've lived through that. The energy of the team now when you walk around is so great. You see smiles. People are excited about what they're working on. 2 months later, Straley was gone. He left Naughty Dog for a sabbatical that morphed into a permanent departure, leaving a void that was difficult to fill. And we heard that same story with workers at BioWare on Andromeda as well as on Anthem. They're being pushed to the limit. They take a break. They have a nervous breakdown. Their doctor's like, listen, you're killing yourself, and they end up leaving entirely. He was well respected at the studio and was recognized as an intense but fair leader who had his hands on almost every aspect of the game. When I asked him on Kotaku's Split Screen podcast in 2018 about his departure, it was clear that he felt burnt out. It was really hard to imagine getting back into the job and feeling as energized as I was back on The Last of Us or Uncharted 2. And so I just felt there was a shift in me. Something else was building up in me that was like, all right, let's see what else is out there. Which is good and bad. Obviously, it's good for his health. It's good for his creativity. He can go out and do other things. At the same time, we lose a guy who's been with a company doing great products that everyone has high expectations for. Definitely high expectations for The Last of Us 2, now that we've seen the leaks. And here One chunk of the studio worked on the DLC. So after the fourth Uncharted, so Naughty Dog split into two groups. One chunk of the studio worked on the DLC turned standalone game Uncharted Lost Legacy, a production that for some people was even more stressful than Uncharted 4. And we don't know who's quoting this, one anonymous developer. It was the worst crunch I've ever experienced. And Uncharted 4 took 2 years to make. So you can imagine how insane those 2 years were. Another chunk entered pre-production on The Last of Us 2, which would be the studio's next big project. So again, there's all like, oh, we learned from our past. We know what not to do. So Neil Druckmann, going off the embers or the fumes of Uncharted 4, got everyone together and says, okay, what is The Last of Us 2 going to look like? Let's plan it all out. And if you know anything about strategy, plans don't survive the battlefield. They honestly felt like they had figured out a way to not have a crunch as much, said one developer. They worked out a lot of the beats of the game and all the features ahead of time. But in game development, things rarely go as planned. So they had a demo in 2018 on E3, again showing builds. Parts of the narrative weren't resonating with players who said they weren't fond of the characters that the writers hoped would be likable. This is 2 years ago. So critics or fans of the game says, hey, you know what? I don't like these characters for whatever reason. It could be an off-the-cuff comment. It could be a seriously detailed analysis. We don't know. But the response from Druckmann and the other leads started scrapping and revising. That's where changes were happening. So one developer, we need to add some stuff so that it tells more of the story or gives you more narrative beats. Now that could go either way. When you're just saying, let's add stuff to a game, what are you talking about? Are you talking about models? Are you talking about levels? Are you talking about voice acting, storytelling, exposition? You can say many things about adding stuff to make you like a thing more. I'm not saying it can't be done, but you have to be very specific of what that means. I remember when I was in school and I joined an Unreal tournament or an Unreal map design club. So they were making a map for Unreal and they were going to submit it to a competition. I was going to be a developer making all the systems on the back end. And this was part of the designer or the video game design course. So animators and modelers, essentially. So a lot of 3D guys. And every meeting, almost every meeting I can remember, maybe there was a comment about developing or code or functionality, maybe 2 minutes. The rest of the meetings were all, we need more stuff. We need more models. We need bigger levels. We need brighter textures. We need more stuff to make it look better. Not to make it play better. Not to make the controls work or the balance work or this mechanic to work or a shark to come jumping out of the water. It was, we need more stuff. So that could be a good thing for your game. It could be a bad thing for your game. It all depends on what capacity they're talking about within the context of the changes. Like what changes do they have to make? So on The Last of Us 2, these revisions led to all sorts of stress and scope creep. This is what I'm talking about. Scope creep is the killer of game development. The funny thing that they talked about later in the article is about the giraffes in The Last of Us. And I remember that from the trailer, I believe. And this did not come from design. This was not pre-planned. This was after the fact. Wouldn't it be great if we had giraffes as opposed to deer, showing off that life continues on even in this crazy environment we're in? And it was a very interesting scene in that game to have that. That came out of just a designer saying, hey, let's have giraffes. Let's try it out. Let's have it work. So you could have great elements like that aren't planned, but those are very strange landmarks on the road to creation of a piece of media like a video game. What we realized pretty early on is that we are putting together Naughty Dog's most ambitious and longest game in our 35-year history. To tell this kind of story, the game needs to be massive. So already you have two huge problems. One, you planned everything out. Two, people don't like it. And three, we have to keep going bigger, which is scope creep, which is going to kill your product. You're going to try and add more stuff that you haven't tested that doesn't work the original design. Then you have to change the entire design, which means you have to change the entire production line, which means you have to retool, call in all your developers to change things, call in all your modelers to change things, etc., etc. By the end of 2018, most departments were already in crunch mode, spending extra hours at the office to keep up with all their tasks. Some people had to work late because they had more to do than could fit into a standard workday. Others found themselves trapped by pipeline clogs. There were artists giving one another assignments, explosions and gunshots, and hey, could you make it so this cutscene looks just right? There's a lot of pushing your current workload aside to meet these real-time demands that come across your desk. Do this thing you weren't planning for, that other thing you weren't planning for, plus what you were planning for. So that's what happens with scope creep, is you have all these new assignments, all these new tasks, and that's not even bug testing. That's not even polishing, making sure the thing you made works properly. That's just, oh yeah, you need more stuff. You need to do more. And this became a never-ending cycle in The Last of Us 2. You feel obligated to be there later because everyone else is. If the animation needed to be put in and you weren't there to help the animator, now you're blocking the animator, and they may give you grief. It may not even be spoken. It may just be a look. Man, you totally screwed me last night by not being here at 11 p.m. So what we do in software development is say, what are your blocks? And it's, what are you waiting on? Is it an error in your code that you just can't solve? Is it someone else? Is it some other department? Are you waiting on a call from someone? So it's anything that slows down production, because they assume if you say I'm going to do something within a week, provided everything goes right, that assumes that everyone involved in that task, whether it's QA or PMs or designs or the client gets back to you, that everything went smoothly, and then you have within a week you have 5 work days to get everything done. So when you say that, your word is your bond, it's like, well, it's not my fault people didn't respond. You should have told your client, you should have told your PM. Well, that's in an ideal scenario. What you should be saying, or what you should be planning for, is worst case scenario, saying this is a 2-week task because I have to wait on 5 different people or 5 different assets, and that takes time. So that's where a lot of this talk of getting stuff done, of planning things, breaks down. So during production, elements of the game kept changing. Again, it's a horrible thing in a AAA title. Everything should be locked down. And there was no real way to be sure whether all those changes would be for the better. So these are changes that haven't been even addressed yet, haven't been tested, and no one knows if they're going to work, which sounds very similar to what we heard from BioWare. What they probably underestimate is that when you work for 2 to 3 years on a game, you want to change things sometimes because you've seen them for a year. I agree. But you know what? Depending on the industry, you have updates, you have changes, you have hot fixes, you have DLC, you have all sorts of things to fix those things because they weren't part of the original plan. Sometimes, as any creative can attest, it's hard to tell whether you're revising that story beat or gameplay mechanic because it actually needs to be changed, or because you've looked at it so long that you've gotten sick of it, which is a strange feeling to get because you keep looking at something and you're not sure whether it's good or bad anymore because you've seen it day in, day out. Is this thing good? I don't know. It looked good when we first saw it. Now I'm kind of sick of it. Now I want to change it. It's the constant perfection problem, or the perfectionist dilemma, where they say it's never finished. And that's with all software. No software is ever finished. It could be elegant. It could be genius that you have a function and everything is clean, it is efficient, and it does everything it needs to be. But there's always the need for revisioning. There's always the need I can make this better. Now that I understand something so much, I've been staring at it for so long, I can make it better. And that's another problem outside of crunch and scope creep and things like that, that creeps up on the creativity of the developer or the designer saying, I can redo it. I can make it better. I want to be better. I want to be better at my craft. And that's more of a personal thing. So you have all these forces working externally and internally of these people making these games, slowing down production and causing more stress. So that's natural, though, in this regard. So on one hand, this can create an empowering, autonomous atmosphere where designers and artists are free to add the little flourishes that make these games unique. The little sides, the ornaments on stuff, the voice acting. Can you do another take there? We'd like to, try to have some fun. And people pick up on that. I agree. Nobody needs to deal with extra layers of bureaucracy if they want to. Make sacks of grain deflate when you shoot them. On the other hand, nobody is there to keep the developers of The Last of Us 2 communicating or stop them from changing things for the sake of change. So it sounds like there was a little bit of freedom there that, yeah, we had this crazy deadline. Yeah, we're in crunch mode. But at the same time, the developers and the designers are like, well, we want to perfect this thing. We want to make it even better. So it's a little bit of, I would say just a little bit, not a lot. Because if you're exhausted, you don't really care about, if I only had 5 more minutes, I'd do this. You'd be pretty tired. You'd be pretty hungry. And nobody's going to tell anyone to stop staying at work all night. It's an amazing creative environment, said one developer, but you can't go home. So it sounds like a massive undertaking for everyone involved. It burns you out. And people get pissed off, as anyone would. People have breaking points. People have different discipline. They say, I want my 8-hour workday. It's like, nope, you're getting 12 hours. And you better pay those people for that time. And if they don't, they're going to feel like they don't belong. Naughty Dog's lead designers expect the same level of quality out of a lot of the junior contractors as they do out of people who have been there for a while, which is ridiculous, said one developer. It's certainly led to a lot of stress and feeling like shit to most people who are new, which sucks. That happens a lot. The demands of a contractor who's just coming in for a paycheck, just to say, okay, I'm going to help you out with your lighting, or I'm going to help you out with your modeling, or whatever. And they expect gold and then some. The main reason current and former employees say is that Naughty Dog's culture of crunch has burned many of them out. The art department also has lost a number of people since Uncharted 4, incurring leads and art directors. The management level was really understaffed, said one developer of the art department. There was no attempt made to hire more. Because you're paying everyone in overtime who are actual developers and artists, you're going to go over budget because you didn't plan for it. That's one of the reasons crunch always happens here, said one developer. People are given the freedom to keep working longer, to push the envelope of what they were working on, to make things just 10% better. It's what the studio looks for when hiring people. They are looking for people with that drive to actually put in those extra hours for better or worse. So they say, hey, we need your help. And while you're here, do what you feel is best. Which, again, it's personal. And there's that 5 to 10% of individual creativity creeping up on you. Say, I can do better. I've gotten that feeling a few times in my life, but not enough to kill myself over. A few Naughty Dog staff have indeed found ways to avoid overtime, working intensely for 8 hours a day and then leaving. But for most of the staff, there's an unspoken social pressure to stick around. And I feel that too, even in quarantine, where it's like, hey, can you keep going with that thing you're doing even though we're not paying you for this? It's like, no. So they have to find some illegal way, like paying you under the table if you're still getting paid a stipend from the government or what have you. That's the reality we're in nowadays for contractors. So some people are just fine with the studio's culture, which why exists in the first place. They're paid well, treated fairly, given extensive time off. Salaried workers aren't paid for overtime work, which is horrible, but they get bonuses after each game ships. I certainly hope so. So there are laws against these things, but it's still a horrible experience. There's this unspoken agreement. A lot of people are very proud they're making Game of the Year, a top quality game, and most amazing art. While that's true, I don't know if they're calculating the sacrifices. And unfortunately, I don't think The Last of Us Part 2 is going to be as great as people think, especially considering the leaks we've got. So it's a sad state of affairs where you have all these people pushing for a product which may not be as good as people think. And if the leaks are to be believed, the 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 art, the quality of art has dropped. Not the artists, not the visual artists, not all the actors, not all the developers. All the product itself will probably function rather well. There probably won't be too many bugs. But it's the quality of the story, the characters, the characterization, the plots, the tribulations they have to go through, the lack of exposition of why characters are behaving the way they're behaving. That's where things are going to suffer. It's always the premise, it's always the creative vision, the original one that gets diluted as all of these other creative visions come into play, as crunch comes down and starts changing things that are bad, that are going to cause things to be bad. And it's sad because you would hope that all of this clamoring, all this focusing and crunching for something great, and you're going to get a really poor story. You know what? If there's people out there that are going to buy this game and expect something of good quality, you will get a quality product in general. But I'm talking about what remains within your mind after you experience these games, after you experience these stories. Was it a good story? Can you say that? And I hope you can. I hope you can say, I appreciated this story. I thought they did a great job. I hope there's lots of people out there that give the story of this game a high rating. But from everything what I'm seeing, from the production pipelines to the plot reveals, the plot points from the leaks, it's going to be a mess, and you're going to piss off your client base. And that's what I'm sad for. Not just the developers and the designers and all the contractors that aren't getting paid or treated properly, but the fans. Because that's why these guys they're putting all their heart and soul into this game, is to give the fans what they want. And I don't think they're going to get it. But time will show us. I could be wrong. I hope so. Thanks for listening, guys, and have yourself a great day.